They once called me Mercy Alcott. Now they called me Lot 17. I don't remember the last time someone spoke my name like it meant anything. Maybe it was my mother, bleeding out in the back of a mining cart outside Blue Rock Ridge. Her lips cracked, and her fingers still clutching the edge of my shawl. The preacher said she named me after a virtue he'd never seen in this territory. That's all I had, a name soaked in irony and a face hidden beneath a burlap sack. Spring of 1871, Deadwood Gulch. Dust clung to your teeth like shame. The wind blew dry and sour thick with the smell of sweat-spoiled grain and rotting saddle leather. I stood barefoot on a makeshift auction stage, wrists bound, face covered since Cheyenne. The sack was stiff from travel and breath tied tight under my chin. It had become my second skin. It did more than hide the scar across my cheek, it erased me entirely. A deputy slammed a splintered gavel into a crate beside him. His badge was more rust than metal. Last lot of the day, he barked. No name, no face. Says shell work. Says shell obey. They called it a bride auction, but there was no illusion of love here. Just worn-out men with dull eyes and rough hands looking for someone to cook clean and keep quiet. Start and bid $2. Laughter cracked like dry bark. Might be a witch under that sack someone spat. Or a corpse. I've seen prettier sacks in a grain silo. Their words didn't sting anymore. Not like they used to. Humiliation loses its bite when you've been passed from hand to hand like stolen silver. I kept my breathing shallow still. One twitch too many and they'd think I was weak. She ain't said a word, the deputy added, like silence made me worthless. A minute passed, then another. Then the crowd shifted, not with excitement but with a wary ripple, like something unexpected had entered the water. A man stepped forward. He was tall. Not the kind of tall that tried to stand over people, but the kind the forest gives to men who spend more time with trees than with lies. His boots were caked in dried creek mud, his shirt sweat-lined, and his coat patched but clean. A wide-brimmed black hat shadowed most of his face. He stopped at the edge of the platform and said simply, "2." The laughter died. The deputy narrowed his eyes. "You sure, mister, I said what I said? No eagerness? No pity? Just certainty." Someone behind me muttered, "Must be desperate." The deputy scratched his beard. "You don't even want to see what you're buying?" The man turned his head slightly enough to show the edge of his jaw. "I'm not buying a face," he said. "I'm marrying a soul." That silenced even the ones who thought they'd seen everything. "Name," the deputy asked. "Tobias Wren, logger, from Black Hollow Ridge." He signed the paper in rough script, and then he turned toward me. "You're now legally wed, miss. Say your name for the record." Silence held. I felt it thicken like fog around a tree trunk. I hadn't said my name aloud in 3 years. My throat was dry. My heart beat in my ears. "My name," I whispered, "is Mercy Alcott." The name cracked like a whip across the hush. For a moment, Tobias didn't move. Then I saw it, just a flicker in his eyes, something like recognition, like the sound of a long-lost song heard beneath snowfall. He stepped onto the platform. His hands moved to my wrists, not yanking, not pulling, just untying the twine with a steadiness that said I was no longer anyone's burden. "You're safe now," he said quietly. It wasn't the words. It was the way he said them, like he meant to prove it for the rest of his life. We walked down from the platform together. No one stopped us. No one laughed. Not even the wind dared to blow. Only the dull creak of boots over plankwood, and the echo of a name, mine, drifting like a prayer through the timber-burned town. Mercy Alcott. For the first time in years, it belonged to me again. Chapter 2. How do you breathe beside a stranger who once took his last breath in your hands? The road out of Deadwood Gulch didn't speak, but it listened. That kind of silence, you don't find it in towns. You find it in the space between two people who've seen too much and said too little. Tobias didn't speak after we left the auction. Neither did I. The burlap still clung to my face, but it wasn't shame that kept it there anymore, it was reflex. Like a scab that grows over memory. a habit of staying unseen. We walked for hours. He led an old mule with a sagging back and a calm, steady gait. Its saddlebag carried only the essentials: dried meat, some firewood, a folded blanket, a flint kit, and something I would later recognize as pine soap. The scent was soft but clear, like someone had decided not to give up on cleanliness even when the world had. My feet blistered and bare, stung with each step on gravel. I didn't say anything, but I slowed. That was enough. Tobias reached into the saddlebag, pulled out a pair of worn boots, and held them out. I stared. My body didn't move. The last time a man handed me anything, it came with bruises. "Take 'em," he said quietly. "They're yours now." I hesitated long enough for the sky to dim. The boots weren't elegant, but they were dry. I slipped them on, and they carried the warmth of someone who meant me no harm. That, more than anything, made my throat close. He didn't push me to speak. He just walked beside me, his shadow long and even. By the time we reached the cabin, the sun was bleeding into the tops of the pines. It wasn't grand. Just a one-room shack built from old pine logs with a slanted roof and a chimney that leaned slightly east. But it was solid, real. There was a stone step before the door and a horseshoe nailed sideways over the frame. A man who believed in luck but didn't trust it. He opened the door and stepped aside. "You choose where you want to stand." That line sat heavy in me. No one had given me choices in a long time. I stepped inside, my fingers brushing the edge of the doorframe like I didn't believe it would hold. The inside was clean, lived in but not cluttered. A table, 2 chairs, a cot by the wall with a folded quilt, a cast-iron stove, a basin for washing, and on a narrow shelf, a single tin cup beside a tiny wooden carving of a deer. It was quiet. I could hear my own breath catch. I crouched near the wall, knees drawn up, sack still on my head. I didn't speak, didn't remove it, didn't ask for food. But he cooked, anyway. The scent came first: salted meat, slow-roasted root vegetables, and something faintly sweet. Cinnamon, nutmeg. My stomach curled into itself, unsure whether to hope. He placed a wooden bowl near me. He didn't force it into my hands, just set it there and returned to his chair. I stared at it for a long time. "What is this?" I finally asked, voice rough beneath the sack. He didn't look up. "I call it the meal for the last one standing." That silence again, but not cold. I used to make it for myself after working the ridge. Then I started making 2 bowls, even when I was eating alone. He stirred the stew. I used to set the second one for my wife, after the war, after everything got quieter than it should have. I said nothing, but I picked up the spoon. The stew was thick, earthy. It tasted like warmth I hadn't earned, like kindness I didn't know how to chew. He spoke again. "Now I set it for you, and for her." My fingers tightened around the spoon. Why, I whispered. "Because you're here," he said simply, "and because I remember what it feels like to be half gone and think no one would notice." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to, because I remembered too. That night, while he washed the bowls, I sat against the wall. My knees weren't drawn so tight anymore. I watched his hands as they moved in the water. They were large, calloused, steady. The hands of someone who had learned how to make things last. Later, he climbed into the cot across the room. He didn't blow out the lamp. He didn't offer a prayer or ask for one. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling, like it might speak to him. I stayed awake long after his breathing went even. The fire dimmed, shadows stretched. I touched the rim of the bowl with one finger, tracing its edge again and again, like the curve of a memory I wasn't ready to let go of. And the cave came back. 3 winters ago, snow up to my knees, breath like knives. I had found him collapsed near Black Ridge Blood, frozen at his temple. He looked like a man already dead, but something in me refused to let him be. I pulled him to the cave behind the waterfall, built a fire, boiled pine bark, and snow in a rusted tin. Pressed it to his lips. He drank. He didn't ask who I was. I didn't tell him. "You don't need to know who I am," I had said. "But you're not going to die tonight. When I left behind one thing, a small cloth embroidered with purple flowers. My mother's. The only soft thing I had left. Now here in this cabin, that manthy one, who once coughed blood into my lap, had bought me for $2 and fed me stew like a vow. I didn't need him to say it. I knew. I looked toward him, his body outlined in firelight, and beneath the sack I whispered, "You remember, don't you?" He didn't answer. But I swear something in the logs shifted. The kind of shift that happens when an old tree recognizes a storm it's already survived. I breathed deep, and for the first time in years, it didn't hurt. Chapter 3, Can You Use the Thing That Once Broke You to Set Yourself Free? It started with silence, but not the kind that soothes, the kind that stalks. The birds had stopped singing. The wind, once soft and pine-sweet, had gone still. Even the mule seemed uneasy, shifting its weight and flicking its ears, though nothing stirred. Out here, when the forest holds its breath, you learn to listen with your bones. Tobias returned from the lower ridge just before dusk, his steps heavy with something unspoken. I was at the stove stirring a thin broth made from wild onions and smoked bone. The burlap sack sat folded on the shelf beside me, untouched for days. I hadn't planned to wear it again. "There's a man in town," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut straight through the room, asking questions. I turned slowly. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that hang like rope." I didn't need more. "Is it him?" Tobias nodded once. "Tall, pale coat, snake embroidery on the sleeve. Eli Cutter." The name sat in my gut like a coal. "And he's not just passing through," Tobias added. "He's sniffing the tree line. Said he's tracking someone who used to wear a sack." I felt the edges of myself tighten. My jaw, my fists, my lungs. He was here. Not the preacher, but his hound, his shadow, his weapon. Reverend Thorne had always sent others to clean his sins. But I wouldn't run this time. I looked down at the sack. The sight of it made my throat close, but then I reached for it. "I'll wear it again," I said, "but not for shame." Tobias stepped forward. "You don't have to go back to that." I met his eyes, steady and clear. "No, but I can choose it now. It's not a prison if I use it as a blade." He didn't argue. He simply nodded the way trees bend in wind they respect. That night, we lit no lantern. We spoke in whispers over a hand-drawn map and the soft crackle of fire. The plan was simple. I would ride out at dawn through the old fire road alone and covered. Tobias would circle back through the western trail, meet the sheriff of Gray Hollow, and lay the trap. Cutter would follow me. Of course he would. He hunted weakness, and nothing screamed prey like a girl in a sack riding alone. But this time, I wasn't the girl he remembered. That night, I sat on the cot with the sack in my lap. My fingers ran along the twine, feeling every fray like a scar I knew by heart. I didn't cry. I didn't tremble. But I didn't sleep either. At first light, I stepped into the saddle. The gelding beneath me was steady, its breath misting in the cold morning air. The sack was tight around my neck again, the way it used to be. But this time, it was my hands that tied the knot. I rode through the thinning trees, through golden fog, and the smell of sap and ash. The trail narrowed into stone and dust, and behind me, I heard it. Hoofbeats, slow, measured. He was following. When we reached the bend near Widow's Ridge, I let the horse slow. I felt Cutter draw closer. Then his voice came sharp and slick like oiled steel. 3 years I've followed ghosts. Now look what crawled out of the woods. Thought you could disappear, huh? I didn't answer. My heart pounded against the sack, but I kept my posture tall. Preacher says you lured his boy into sin. Says you burned down God's house with your lies. Reckon I should get paid double for dragging you back with a rope or dead. I kept writing. My fingers clenched the reins. You ain't gonna speak, he called. Fine, doesn't matter. Dead girls don't talk. That's when Tobias' voice rang out loud and cutting. Neither do men with rifles trained on their spines. Cutter wheeled around too late. The sheriff of Gray Hollow stepped from behind a boulder, rifle cocked. 2 deputies flanked the ridge. Tobias emerged, last axe in hand, face hard as river stone. Cutter hesitated. His hand twitched toward his holster. I slipped one hand to my neck and spoke. Eli Cutter. He froze. The voice under the sack knew it. Not a ghost, not a myth, but real. You remember me, don't you? I said. The girl who never begged. The moment shattered. Cutter blinked. Tobias moved. A shot cracked not at flesh, but at the ground, by Cutter's boots. The message was clear. Don't! Cutter dropped his gun. Hands raised. The sheriff stepped forward, binding him tight. Charged with false bounty, intent to harm, and riding with knowledge of a wrongful arrest, he said. Cutter spat into the dirt. You think this changes anything? She's still marked. No, I said. I'm not. I dismounted and walked forward. My fingers pulled the knot at the back of my neck. The sack slipped off. The air touched my face like truth. I looked straight at Cutter as the light caught the scar on my cheek. I wore this once because I had no voice. I wore it today because I had something to say. Tobias stepped beside me, silent but sure. He looked at the sack in my hands. What now? I didn't answer at first. Then I folded it. Once, twice, then again. I keep it, I said. Not because it hides me, because it reminds me what I've survived. Tobias nodded slowly. Then without a word, he pulled something from his coat, a match. He struck it and offered it to me. I hesitated. Then I touched the flame to the frayed edge. The sack caught. The fire bloomed orange and fast. Together, we watched it burn, and I breathed not in fear, not in memory, but in victory. What once silenced me had become my signal. Smoke curled into the sky like a flag no longer white. Just the beginning. Chapter 4. If I was no longer hunted, could I still bear to be seen? The fire had gone out, but something in me kept smoldering. It wasn't just the sack I'd burned. It was the years of swallowing silence, of letting shame grow teeth behind my ribs. Now that it was gone, the world didn't feel lighter, just different. Like the air had been rearranged. In town, people no longer whispered when I passed. Or maybe they did, but the weight of it didn't press on my back the way it used to. I could meet their eyes now, and some of them even held the gaze. Not in judgment, in question. A wondering. A shift. Then on a day so still you'd think even the wind was listening, she came. The knock on our cabin door was soft, but it broke something. Tobias answered. He always did. I stood in the kitchen, flour on my wrists from kneading the morning dough, and when I saw her, I felt the years collapse into one long-held breath. She was younger than I remembered, though, wed likely aged the same. Her hair was pinned back with care, but the scarf at her neck gave her away. Not just for its color, but for the way she clutched it, like a child holds tight to the hem of truth. My name is Mavis Green, she said, not looking at me. I worked at the Ridley house. She faltered, eyes flicking to the porch floor. I was there that night. My chest tightened. She glanced at Tobias. May I speak with her? He turned to me, silent but steady, his eyes asking without pressing. I nodded. Inside, Mavis sat at our table, hands folded as if in prayer. The fire crackled, but the silence between us crackled louder. I saw what he did, she said. I heard you cry out. I saw him come out alone in your face after. I did nothing. My fingers closed around the edge of the wooden table. I didn't speak. I told myself I couldn't afford to lose my job. I had nowhere else to go. Her voice broke. But the truth was afraid. Afraid of him. Afraid of what siding with you would cost me. There it was. The confession. The wound. I looked at her. Truly looked. Not the way I had when she'd passed me towels with downcast eyes and averted glances. But no as a woman who'd chosen silence and come to break it. I'm sorry, she whispered. Not just for then, but for waiting this long. My voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. Why now? Mavis blinked. Because you burned the sack. Because you didn't hide. Because I couldn't live one more season knowing I had a voice and left it buried. She reached into her satchel and pulled out folded parchment. I wrote a statement, a sworn one. Names, dates, what I saw. I want to send it to the court in Grey Hollow, if you'll allow me. My throat closed. Then slowly I nodded. You don't need my permission to do what's right. She bit her lip. I don't want to do it for me. You already are, I said gently. But you're also doing it for the girl I was. And the girls, we both were. That afternoon, Tobias and I helped her transcribe every word clearly onto court paper. The sheriff came to witness it, and for the first time in years, I felt the past loosen its grip on my spine. Weeks passed like wind through tall grass. Not rushing, not lingering, the courier carried Mavis' letter east. And while we waited, I found myself returning to places I used to avoid. The pine grove, the trail where Cutter had last tried to track me, the creek I used to sit beside and pray to disappear. But I wasn't vanishing anymore. I was forming. Then came the sheriff again, this time with a letter. He didn't say much, just handed it to me on the porch. Tobias stood beside me as I read. Charges dropped. Allegations overturned. Name cleared. I held the paper in my hands for a long while, not crying, not smiling, just letting it live there, letting it be. Then I walked, down the familiar trail, past the tall pine, to the place where I once used to hide from the sun. I knelt in the dirt and let the light touch my face. I'm not hunted anymore, I whispered. And the world in reply simply breathed. Back at the cabin, Tobias had built something. 4 wooden posts and linen stretched across the top like a wildflower canopy. No words needed. I knew what it was. We told no one but a few. Mavis returned this time in a borrowed dress and clearer eyes. The townsfolk who came stood respectfully apart as if they knew the moment wasn't theirs to claim. I wore muslin stitched by my own hands, and atop my head a veil Tobias had fashioned from the ashes of the sack-cleaned, softened, edged with lavender thread. The weight of it was gentle, the meaning anything but. When I stepped beneath the arch, Tobias was already waiting, shirt pressed, boots clean, eyes unwavering. You don't belong to your pain, he whispered when I reached him. You belong to your truth, and I'm proud to stand beside it, I replied. We said no vows aloud, none were needed. The wind caught the linen, the birds quieted, and for the first time, I wasn't becoming someone new. I was finally returning to who I had always been. Chapter 5. What if forgiveness was the only bullet left in the chamber? I used to believe the final page of a story was death or revenge, maybe, but now I know better. Sometimes the end is quiet. Sometimes it's a beginning so fragile you can't breathe near it. It was late spring when the new sheriff arrived, not with a badge pinned proud nor a posse behind him, but with a worn satchel, a weather-beaten Bible, and the eyes of a man who'd walked through hell carrying someone else's sins. His name was Elias Boone. Not the preacher, not the lawman, just Elias. And he was my father. I hadn't seen him since I was 7. The night he handed me over to the orphanage in Santa Fe said nothing but, "They'll feed you here," and turned away like I was dust on his boot. I hated him, hated his silence more than anything. But that hate was an old barn left to rot. My heart had burned it down already. Still, when he stepped into our town square, his shadow falling long across the chapel steps, I felt something rise in me. I didn't know I had left. Not anger, not longing, just the ache of unfinished prayers. Tobias reached for my hand. He'd been mending fences all morning, but somehow knew when I needed steadying. "Want me to walk with you?" he asked, brushing a curl from my cheek. "No," I whispered. "If this chapter writes itself in silence, it's got to be mine." So I crossed the square alone. The townsfolk parted like wheat around me, familiar faces I'd once feared, or healed, or loved. Eli Cutter was long gone, banished beyond the mesa after the trial. Mercy had been restored to the name I wore like fresh linen clean, warm, no longer a lie. But as I stood in front of Elias Boone, I didn't see the man who abandoned me. I saw the man who once sang to my mother on stormy nights. The one who carved her name into the oak table I still keep in my kitchen. The man who loved her until the bottle hollowed him out like a coyote-chewed carcass. "You look like her," he said, voice dry as dust. "I don't know if that's a compliment," I replied, arms crossed. "It is," he said, then paused. "She made me better, and I broke that." I waited. The wind rustled through the pines behind us. A red-tailed hawk cried overhead. The sun was kind that day, not too harsh, not too soft, like it knew the world was holding its breath. "I came back to confess," he said. "Not to you, to the people, to what I did in the name of righteousness. I was never righteous. I was just scared. It would have been easier if he'd asked forgiveness. But Elias Boone didn't. And that's what made me believe him." The people gathered as he stepped up to the chapel steps, pulling out that old Bible like it might still catch fire in his hands. He spoke for a long time, about the things men justify when their power goes unchallenged, about the blood he carried and the things he couldn't undo. He named names, his own first. Then he stepped down, left the Bible there, walked into the crowd like a man ready to be stoned. But no stone came. Tobias stepped forward first. Then Martha Jean, the saloon cook, whose brother Boone once jailed over a false debt. Then old Jed from the blacksmiths, who simply tipped his hat and muttered, "Hell's hot, but truth burns longer." Welcome back. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't absolution. It was something harder, acknowledgement. I sat with him that night on our porch, the same one where Tobias and I hung lavender to dry, and watched deer wander through the brush. The fireflies came early that summer, and I swear one landed on his shoulder just as he said, "You ever wonder if blood can forgive blood?" I did. Still do. But I looked at Tobias holding our baby girl inside through the window, saw the way his body curved around hers like a question mark over something sacred. And I thought, maybe this is how legacies break. Not with fire, not with vengeance, but with someone choosing peace even when war is easier. Elias Boone didn't stay long, just long enough to help build the new schoolhouse, read scripture on Sundays with a tremble in his voice, and carve his name under mine on the town's memorial tree. He left one morning without a word, but he left behind his hat and a note folded in its brim. "Tell her I finally learned what mercy looks like." I keep it in my drawer, along with a ribbon from my wedding dress and a silver locket Tobias gave me the day I said yes to a new life. And every so often, when thunder rolls across the plains and I hear the wind cry like it remembers, I open that drawer. And I whisper back, "She forgives you." Because maybe the best Wild West stories aren't about gunfights or gold. Maybe they're about the courage it takes to let go of the story you were handed and write your own. In a land where law and mercy rarely walked hand in hand. Mercy Alcott's story reminds us that the human heart is the final frontier. Across 5 parts, we watched a young woman unknown underestimated stand against power prejudice and the haunting weight of legacy. She didn't have titles, weapons, or certainty. What she had was grit, love, and the unshakable belief that even in a ruthless world, tenderness could be a revolution. For those of us who have carried burdens for decades, family secrets, regrets, missed chances, Mercy's journey speaks softly but powerfully. It reminds us that it's never too late to reclaim our voice, to choose compassion over fear, and to become protectors of what's right even when the cost is high. Many watching may know what it means to carry guilt that isn't theirs, or to forgive someone who didn't know how to ask. If you've ever felt like the world forgot your story, or buried it beneath duty years, or pain, this one's for you. You've just heard one powerful story. Many more remain untold. Click to discover more raw, gripping, deeply human tales from the Wild West.